I'll be just going over an overview of what's new in React 18. So yeah, quickly an introduction about myself. So I'm currently a master's student at the Uni of Bath. I have a few years of experience as a full stack engineer before. So that's my GitHub and LinkedIn if you want to connect. So getting onto it directly. So yeah, concurrent React. So how many of you have worked with React here? Okay, pretty good, most of you. So I don't need to explain what React is. But concurrency was a feature which was coming into React like since 2016. That was the first time you heard about there being a need for concurrency in React, because how the JavaScript critical path works is like in a synchronous manner. So you have everything rendering and there's no interrupting the render unless that render finishes. So React 18 is mostly a performance-centric update to React. So most of the developers don't see a change upfront. It's all under the hood. And most of the under the hood changes are for the renderers, and there's something called auto batching, which we'll look into in a second. And there are a lot of APIs which came up, and hooks for app developers, and some APIs for library maintainers as well. So what I was talking about earlier, so when you go through the critical rendering path, this is what happens. You have your DOM, and then it sees like your HTML comes up first, and it sees like you need your JS or not, like depending on where you call your JS, and it sees if you have styles, it calls up the styles. And now with the combination of all those, you have your rendering tree made. Then it checks for the layout of your items on screen, and then it finally paints. So this is a synchronous task. And so if you've ever had a lot of like high render tasks on React, you generally see that some of the inputs or some of your event handlers lag behind. So that was an issue which the React working committee found out like in 2016, and they were trying to fix that for a long time. And that's how, if you know React Fiber and things like that, that's how it came up to be. So what happens in general is, so these are a few sketches I put up. Hopefully you can see it. So this blue line over here represents a render which happens like from start to end. But that's how React used to render things. Like whenever you update state, it re-renders. So when a re-render happens, it has to go from the beginning to the end, and until that's finished, nothing else happens, because all of this happens on the main thread in JavaScript. But now what you can do is you can interrupt a render. So if you see the render R1 here, it's rendering, and then when you reach in between, you can either pause it there and then go to another page. When you come back, it can resume, or you can totally abandon that. So what happens when you come back, you can have if you have another more urgent task at hand, you can let that act, and that would re-render the page again with that task taking priority. So this is something which we couldn't do earlier with React. Again, just wrapping what I told before. So it was previously synchronous. So whenever you have a render happening, that render happens from start to finish, and then your next render happens. So again, if you generally feel it if you have a lot of like heavy renders or heavy computation or CPU intensive tasks happening under the hood, you could never put your input in properly. So, and this concurrent feature is very implicit. Like the developers, you can't see it like upfront, but most of these are under the hood changes, like to the foundations of React itself. And like as devs, we can think of what we need to do for the UI to like render something, and React takes care of how it does it under the hood. Yeah. So again, we talk about reusable state, which is if we go back, like once you're at a page and there's some rendering happening, you go to a new tab, and when you come back, you can resume from that point of rendering. So that creates the possibility of having reusable state. Like there are multiple UIs and in the backend, and that comes up depending on which state you come back to or navigate back to. So that's in a nutshell how concurrent rendering works. So this is another great feature which comes up in React 18, which is automatic batching. So yeah, so in general, so everyone knows when you set state, like the state, I mean, whenever you set state, it invokes a re-render, and like, so what happens in React before is like all the event handlers have their state batched together anyway. So if you have an on click or on key up or key down or something like that, all the set states are batched together. Like it happens at the end of the micro, it's all batched together, and the microtask queue takes care of it at the end. And this now in React 18, it works with any other like function as well, which like a promise or a set timeout. So earlier, these two set states inside a fetch would re-render the UI twice because you're doing an update to state first, then an update to state again. So that would re-render it. Now these are batched together such that it happens together. React makes a list of all the changes it has to make. It goes to the microtask queue and then updates this in a batch. So hence automatic batching. So again, this might cause issues in some set state or your state updates. And if that happens and you do not want to like opt into this functionality, you could use the method flush sync, because this comes out of the box. Your automatic batching comes out of the box for React 18, and you could use flush sync to opt out of this feature for any specific state update you do, and that doesn't play well with these features. So transitions, this is something new to me. So I mean, most of this talk's inspired by the React Working Committee's talks given on React 18 and the documentation. So yeah, this was a new thing for me. But yeah, so this is a normal Google Chrome tab, and I'm searching on this search bar. And if you can see at the network tab, there's no throttling. That means it's running at whatever speed my internet is, and it's pretty fast. So what are transitions actually? So what do you think is the most like important experience when you come to a search bar? Like, do you want to see your search results first, or do you want to see if your UI is actually working and picking up what you've entered? So I think Google got it right. So Google takes care of it by displaying what you have entered first, and then it shows you whatever results are coming with the type ahead. Yeah. So that's what happens in an ideal scenario. But now if you see, yeah. Now if you see that I've switched it to slow 3G, so that's like you have a very bad network connection and the internet's pretty bad. So let's see what happens first here. Yeah, so if you notice that like the input field populates first, and then once like it has time to like go and fetch the results for the type ahead, it shows that up here. So that's the ideal way it should behave, and the Google search bar it's done it right. But what happens in React generally before 18 was that if you have another fetch or another render happening, like suppose you have your input and the fetching results in the same tab, it wouldn't it would try to do it at the same time, and it would try to like get the results back from the search query and then show you what you've entered. But that's a janky user experience, and that's not something the user would like really want. So there's a hook which they introduced in React 18 for this, and this is called the start transition hook. So basically what it does, like as you can see, like your prioritized task is you putting your input to the input field and that reflecting there. And you can use a start transition hook and have any other task which is not that important to happen later. So basically now React, so as I've told you before, React is now, you could interrupt React in between its renders. Now React can understand what is a prioritized or urgent task and what is a task which could be like pushed onto for later. So doing this, you always have your priority task running first, and in case of any interrupt, that doesn't get interrupted. The other transition tasks get interrupted. Yeah, it helps you prioritize updates, and it again makes React know which to interrupt and which not to interrupt. So you might be thinking, so when these transitions don't show up, what do you do? I mean, that was something that was supposed to happen before, and that's not happening now. So you could use transition hooks, and that hook basically it gives you back, and like it destructs and gives you back two other hooks, and you can use the is pending part to show what is supposed to happen, say a loader or something like that, by the time the transition is happening. And once the transition has a chance to really render, the original transition shows up. And the transition in this case is the search results coming from the search query. Yeah, so use cases would be when you have heavy rendering tasks going on your React application. You could prioritize which to render first and which to render later on. And I mean, that's the first time we're getting control of that. React used to do this under the hood before. Now the developers have a chance to like prioritize what we need first and what comes later. So I mean, slow network requests could be a use case, but currently it doesn't work. And you could use libraries like Relay, which uses Suspense under the hood. So yeah. Another really big feature which comes up is Suspense on the server. Does anyone know how Suspense works, or has anyone used Suspense? Yeah. Okay. Could you just let me know your understanding of it?
What's Suspense? So it's when you're like data fetching, but then you cause like a subtree in React to disappear and show a loading spinner instead. So you effectively throw a promise, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
You throw a promise out of a render function, and then
it re-renders that when that's ready. So basically, the sub part of the component renders when it's ready.
Yeah.
Comes back. Yeah. So now you have Suspense on the server. Yeah. So basically, it's like what server-side rendering is basically that you want your UI to be more useful in general, because there are a lot of scenarios where you have heavy JavaScript bundles which come in and your page is just loading and you don't see anything there. You don't even see a skeleton. So server-side rendering is used to speed up or give the user something to look at least by the time the JS bundles load. So the server sends over HTML to the client, and the client shows that HTML until all the other JavaScript loads. So at least the user feels like there's something happening on their end. Yeah. So this is a piece of art which I put together, but hopefully you can understand. So we talk about bottlenecks here, which is, for example, that's the first image is a web page, and the one with the yellow and the green lines, they've loaded. Like they're not like heavy, they don't have a lot of JavaScript there, and that just loads. But the one with the red squiggly line, that's like the bottleneck. Basically, that takes a lot of time to load. And what used to happen before is that if there's one subpart which takes a lot of time to come up, it blocks the whole thing, and the whole page is like doesn't render. So it was more like an all or nothing approach. But what we can do right now is we could have the Suspense, like we could have Suspense happen at the server side. So you could use this from your server. So now the server knows that if this takes a long time to load, you could show a loader. So with Suspense on the server, it goes from not loading at all to loading the other stuff and waiting until the other part of the HTML is ready to be streamed from the server to your client. So this is actually facilitated under the hood by code splitting. So split parts of your code and send it when it's ready. Yeah, so this, I think, covers the chunk of what's really changed in React 18 from a general app developer's perspective. And there are a lot of other APIs which have changed under the hood. Like I told you, React 18 has been a huge change to the foundations of how React works. So, I mean, it might not be very evident to developers like me who just work with products, but for library maintainers and other people who maintain low-level workings of React, it has a lot of changes. So I'm just going to go over a few APIs which changed, not all of them. Yeah. So again, use ID is an API or a hook which has come up, which generates like specific IDs for forms, and these can be used by library maintainers such that you have proper numbering or naming of like your component, your form elements and so on. And this could be used for accessibility. Like, so when you need accessibility to be built in, you could use these IDs to like catch hold of which element is what. And using external store is again another API which could be used for external state management libraries or store managers for having a synchronous update to their stores. So this really plays well with the current state managers, even though React uses concurrent rendering under the hood. And again, so one big change for React developers right now, if you update to React 18, would be your React DOM.render doesn't work. It'll throw an error when you try, like if you directly use any of these features into your React application, even if you update it to React 18. So you need to use create root instead of render, and as well as React DOM.hydrate doesn't work, and you have to use hydrate root. Yeah, so this has been like an overview of what has happened and what has changed and what we can use in React 18. But this is just another in general understanding of how we can adopt React 18 today. So concurrent behavior is only used when you actually use one of the new features. What was actually different with concurrent mode before is that the whole app used to run has to use concurrent mode, and that doesn't work. And they also try to bring in like different versions of React before, like some part of the app runs React 16, some part runs React 17, but that also wasn't a really good solution. So right now they've fixed that by only letting you use concurrent behavior when you use one of the hooks or one of the APIs mentioned below. And again, some libraries and components which are already existing or which you use in your application wouldn't play well with these features, and that you might need to do some tinkering around with. And most of all, use strict mode, which was there before, but if you use strict mode now, you'll exactly know where you're going wrong with your React 18 problems, and if it's a concurrent issue, it would bring that up directly. And strict mode just gives you errors in your dev environment, so it's pretty safe to put in your prod environment, so it doesn't show any of the errors to your clients. So yeah.